I knew, like, the peace that I got, I knew I could have died that day pretty easy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I didn't. So I knew that my life was spared for a reason. And even if that reason was just to be a dad and not be able to ever do anything for myself again, I knew that there was a reason, and I had that peace that went through my body and my mind that life's not about me anymore. It's about my kids.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TEMSEA Leadership Podcast. My name is Eric Claus, and once again, I have the honor to be able to be your host. I am so grateful that you joined us today for this amazing episode, and also you can check this out on YouTube. This conversation today is with Jason Koger. Jason is a professional speaker, an author, and a mentor to many people across the world. His story is so inspiring, and I know that it will add value to all of you listening. Over 10 years ago, Jason had a devastating injury and as a result, lost both of his arms. Jason takes us on a journey about how his life has forever changed. We appreciate you joining us today, and we know you're going to enjoy this episode. Well, Jason, welcome to the TEMSEA Leadership Podcast, man. We are so excited that you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. No, I'm excited to be here too. I love sharing my story, and hopefully it'll help some people out.
Well, I know it will, and we're going to have a great time. For those that are listening to the podcast, our plans are to put this on YouTube so they can kind of get a visual, and I know you're going to kind of show us a little bit about what's happening, but I can't help but notice your shirt. Can you kind of show it for the camera?
So this was my first shirt my brother-in-law gave to me after I lost both hands. It says, "Look, Ma, no hands." And then he gave me one that says, "Don't shoot, I'm unarmed."
Oh, gosh. I can't wait to talk about your family because they're a big part of your story. But when we start this, Jason, I would love for you to share the story that you told Lee and I when we were doing the kind of like the pre-brief about, so you're out of the hospital, you're trying to figure out life, you're trying to figure out how to adapt and what's the new norm. And you shared an event that happened in the store, and I would love for you to share that story with us.
So when I first got home from losing both arms, obviously, I was trying to figure out life again. And at the time, I had two daughters. My oldest was Billy Grace. She was 21 months old. And my youngest was Campbell. And Campbell was 3 months old at this time. And so anyway, our first trip to Owensboro, Kentucky, which is where I live, my wife wanted to go to Hobby Lobby. So we decided to go to this Hobby Lobby, and I cannot stand to shop. So I told her, I said, well, I'll take Billy Grace because she's 21 months old. She can walk. I could hold her at the time, but Campbell was still in a car seat. So she was just going to ride in the shopping cart. And so I told Jenny, I said, you take Campbell, I'll take Billy. We're just going to walk around and do whatever. When you're ready to go home, we'll go. So I was actually holding Billy in my nubs, is what I call it. I didn't have prosthetics at the time. So I had Billy Grace in my arm, and we were walking down an aisle, and she started kicking her feet. And, I was about to drop her, so I set her down on the ground real quick, and I said, Billy Grace, what are you doing? And she just had this big smile and went running away from me. And so I yelled at her, and I said, Billy Grace, get back over here. And nobody was on this aisle but me and her. And she was at the end of it at the time, and she turned around. She had this big smile on her face. And I tell people, when you watch a movie and everything's like slow motion and you got this little girl that's running to you to give you this big hug, kiss, and, as a father, it's like the best feeling in the world that you got this little girl that loves you. And so she's running towards me in slow motion, and I got my arms or my nubs, kind of out, ready for her to jump in my arms. And she gets to me, and she grabs me by my pants, and she pulls my pants down to my ankles. So at that time, I'm like, oh, crap, I can't pull them up. I couldn't put my own clothes on at the time. And I'm like, Billy Grace, you got to pull my pants up. You got to pull my pants up. She ain't having it. So I'm like, crap, what do I do? It's like, I got to find Jenny, which I didn't know where she was. So I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to walk to the outside aisle because there won't be as many people probably. So I wobble as fast as I can, which I got pants down to my ankles. And I get to the very end and I turn to the right and I walk and walk and walk, and like 3 or 4 rows back, I finally see Jenny and I'm like, Jenny, you got to pull my pants up. She turns around and she's like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. I'm like, yeah, it's embarrassing. I just lost my pants in the middle of Hobby Lobby. So she pulls my pants up and I tell her what happened. And she's like, that is awful. And I was like, it could have been worse. And she was like, how can it be worse? Like, you lost your pants in the middle of Hobby Lobby. I said, well, at least my underwear stayed up.
Oh my gosh. When you told us that story, and even now I'm like tears are running down my face. That is absolutely crazy. Well, we appreciate you sharing that. And I know the participants are going to love that. And, Jason, one of the things that stood out before we get into your story was your attitude is unbelievable. And I can't wait to unpack really a lot of that. But before we dive into that, will you kind of share a little bit about your experience growing up? Because you have an incredible family unit, and just kind of walk us through what it was like growing up. Who were some of the influences that really helped shape you into the man that you are today?
Yeah. So I'm from Owensboro, Kentucky. Actually, I live in Utica, Kentucky, which is just right outside of Owensboro. I'm probably about 7 or 8 miles from town, in the county. And where I grew up, it was my mom and dad's house. My dad built this house in 1980. And then right next door to my house is my uncle, which I had a cousin that's my age that lived there. Right next door to him is my grandfather, which is my mom's dad. Right next to him is my other uncle, which I have a cousin that's a year older than us. And then around my house, my grandfather and them farm about 2,300 acres of corn and soybeans. So we have a lot of area to run around, ride four-wheelers, just be able to kind of do what we wanted as kids, and growing up, I always had this thought that, one of these days I'm gonna buy my mom and dad's house, and my cousin's gonna move back out here, my other cousin, and we're gonna raise our kids the same way we were raised up. And everybody in my neighborhood has been here my entire life. So once people move out here, they stay here. It says a lot about the neighborhood. Everybody takes care of each other, and if you see somebody that's in a bind doing something across the street, you go over and help. You don't expect money or whatever. You just kind of do that for everybody. And but my dad, he was raised up pretty poor. As my dad, I got 3 uncles and an aunt. So his brothers and sisters, and my grandfather, Papa Koger, and my grandmother never owned their own house. They were raised really poor. My dad's been a self-provider since he was about the age of 14, working in tobacco patches and literally driving, before he was 16 years old, he'd drive to work and all that kind of stuff. And then my dad joined the Army, and he became a drill sergeant in the Army. And so my dad's always been that person that you cannot tell him he couldn't do something, because he's going to show you he can. He worked extremely hard at everything he did. He would set goals, and he would make sure he reached those goals. And I really didn't realize any of that until, until adulthood. I never noticed that my dad had all these plans. And so my dad started a construction company in 1984. He had $1,500 to his name. That's all he had. And was very successful. And he was very successful for many reasons. He set a goal, and he's definitely a hard worker. And he always told people what he would do, and he would never back down from his word. Nowadays it kind of can get you in a bind if you don't have a signed contract with somebody, But my dad would shake your hand, and if he told you he's going to do something, I don't care if it cost him money or not, he did it. Like that's just the way he was raised. And obviously, all that has helped me be who I am today. And I think back when I was a kid, I would have never imagined that I would have gone through what I've gone through.
Mhm.
And I would have never imagined how could a person get through what I've gone through. But now that I've done that, it makes me go back to my early age and understand that everything that my parents have taught me and the way they lived their life has definitely molded me into the person I am today. And I hear people say that I'm inspiring, that I'm strong, that people couldn't do what I've done. All I did was I made a decision that I wanted to be successful. I wanted to be a successful amputee. I wanted to be able to do everything I wanted to do before. I wanted to be the same dad I was. I didn't want an accident or losing my arms define who I was.
Yeah.
That's what I didn't want. And I don't know if I told you the story, and I know we're going to get into the day of my accident, but my grandfather, my mom's dad, he passed away probably 3 months before I got hurt.
Okay.
And he was a single arm amputee. He was the only upper limb amputee that I've ever seen in my life. And I felt like he was the first amputee in the world, and I was the second.
Okay.
I've never seen anybody like this.
Wow. I'm sure you worked your butt off on the farm, and it was expected of you. Is that right?
Absolutely. I worked on the farm some, but I worked with my dad a lot. So my dad,
Okay.
when he started his construction company, as a little boy, I always wanted to be with my dad.
Yeah.
So I went to work with my dad all the time, even at 4, 5, 6 years old. I remember in the truck and going, and I started out with I was the person that swept the floors, and I did whatever he wanted me to do, and I continued that from a very young age until the day I got hurt. And I say that because I'm talking about manual labor. Um, Obviously, whenever I got hurt, my job title and the things I do now has totally changed because now I just share my story and talk to people and give speeches, and I work with the Bionic Hand Company and all that kind of stuff. But when I'm home, I'm always doing something. I have a farm of my own now that I hunt on. It's almost 300 acres. I like to bush hog. I like to plant food plots. I like doing all that kind of stuff because I love being busy. I love working on stuff.
Yeah, Jason, I'm so glad you talked about that because I think that's such an important part of your story is when you were hurt, you already had the work ethic and you knew from growing up that nothing was going to come easy, that you were going to have to do it. You were going to have to sweep the floors, right? You were going to have to get down and you were going to have to, it wasn't an accident that you're successful, just based on your unit and your family and everything you've been through. And so let's go ahead and jump into the story on what exactly happened. And if you don't mind, go ahead and if you don't mind, hold up your arms and show everybody here. Wow, it's just absolutely fascinating. We got so much to unpack on that. But
So I also have bionic hands, and I'll get into that a little bit later.
yeah,
I don't have them on right now. You're gonna laugh about this, but um, even body powered hooks are gonna break. You're gonna break cables if you're very active. And yesterday I actually broke my thumb. So so
wow.
they're mailing me a thumb right now, and I got an email saying that my thumb's gonna be here today. And then all I do is most people don't know how to replace them, but I do. So I will replace my own thumb, and it won't take 20 minutes, 10 minutes, and then I'll be up and going again. So the reason I don't have my my myoelectrics on right now is because the thumb's not working. So I got the body powered on right now.
Yes, wow. This is amazing. Yeah. Well, let's dig into it, man. We have so much to unpack, and take us back to that day.
Yeah. So before March 1st, 2008, we were working a bunch of hours at a place called TVA, which is a power plant. And my dad owns his own company, like I said. So I was working for my dad, but we were working at a power plant where we was working at, not very far from my house, probably 45 minutes from my home. And we were working 7/12s for probably almost a year, maybe a little longer than a year. So I was working a lot of hours, and I keep going back to this too because I think obviously I didn't even share that another big part of my success is my faith. And I feel like God has plans for everybody, and sometimes we don't understand why we go through certain things. And I think that people do not need to dwell on why this happened. You just got to figure out your purpose because we all have a purpose. So here I was working 7/12s with two young daughters. Actually, I just bought my mom and dad's house, so I was starting to do what I wanted to do as a kid, which is, live in my mom and dad's house, let them move to town, something smaller, and me and my cousins be back out here where I was raised up. But working 7/12s, I was making a lot of money, right? I didn't have time to spend money, so I was making, I was in a union, I was a union pipe fitter. So I was making really good wages anyway on regular time. Then you got overtime, then you got holiday pay and triple time. And so, I was making really good money. And what I was doing was I was putting that money towards my home because I wanted to pay my house off as fast as I could. So I was putting 2 or 3 times as much on my house to try to get the loan down to nothing. By the time March 1st of 2008 happened, I almost had my house paid for. I was 29 years old. And I think back at that, and the reason I say that is because that must have been the plan to have something almost paid for that I didn't have to worry about. Was I going to lose my home? Was I going to be able to still stay where I was? It was kind of almost taken care of before March 1st, 2008. But on March 1st, 2008 was one of the first days I was off work. I decided that I woke up that morning and my wife obviously had a lot of chores for me to do around the house. And in Owensboro at the mall, there was a little train ride you could go on, like a little kiddie train ride. And I told Jenny, I was like, hey, I'm going to wake up in the morning. I'm going to take the girls to the mall and put them on this little train ride. So we went to the mall and I met my sister there actually, and she has a daughter that's in between my 2 daughters' age. So Billy Grace again, 21 months old, Campbell's 3 months old. Go to the mall, go on this little train ride, come home. When we get home, I told my wife, I said, hey, I'm going to put the kids down for a nap. And I said, I'm going to kind of just do some honeydew chores or whatever. And really, I know I'm going to talk about my book later. I go into a lot more detail in my book, but some people had came over. My wife's brother was about to get married. My wife was a graphic design major, so she was going to make wedding invitations for her brother and fixing to be sister-in-law. So they came over, and she had a couple kids, her brother and a couple friends with them. And I don't know how old they were at the time, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. So anyway, they come in, and I tell my wife, I said, hey, while y'all are working on the computer, me and the boys are going to go outside and play a little basketball. We're going to do something. So, because I love kids. I absolutely love being around kids. So we go out in the driveway and play a little bit of basketball. And then one of them said something about, hey, let's go on a 4-wheeler ride. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I'll take you around my grandfather's farm. And I know I already said this, but you got my house, my uncle's house, my grandfather's house, my other uncle's house. If you leave my house and go behind my house, there's a gravel lane. It's just an old farm road to get to the fields, but it's a U shape and it ends up at my grandfather's. So I told the boys, I was like, hey, we'll just go ride around the farm real quick. It's going to be a 10-minute ride, 5-minute ride. We'll come home. I'm going to do some work around the house. No big deal. So we go on this ride. And people's got to remember, I've been around this farm for 29 years. Every single day I've been around the farm. So I've been around this farm millions of times, probably billions of times, So I know, and I tell people, it's just like when you go to your home and you wake up in the middle of the night, you want to go use the bathroom. You don't have to worry about, are you going to trip over your shoes, or you have to turn the light on because you know your house well enough. You can walk to the bathroom in the dark, do your business, walk out, go to bed, no big deal. I felt the same way going around my grandfather's farm. So I'm kind of like looking across the field and just kind of going slow. Long and short, there's the U shape, the second turn. There's a culvert there. It's the only place you can cross. And whenever I got to that culvert, I had noticed right there at the last moment that there was a line. Didn't know what it was, but this line hit me and landed in between my chest and my handlebars on my four-wheeler. I looked over and I noticed it was a down power line. But I also noticed that line went to a field pump, which is how you take, when it floods, you take water out of the field. Well, in March, there's no crops. So the first thing that goes through my mind is there's no power to this line, right? It goes to the field pump. Somebody's got it turned off. But then in the back of my mind as well, I'm like, everybody says when you're on rubber tires, you have nothing to worry about either. So I'm telling the kids, don't touch anything. And I'm trying to figure out what I can do. And the only thing I can do to get off this line, I had to raise it up to back up, go forward, because it was stuck between my handlebars and my body. But I noticed over the hill that my cousin was outside. So I got off the line, went to my cousin's house, brought him back down there. I said, hey, I need to show you this line that's down. I'm afraid that there's some kids in our neighborhood that may go on a four-wheeler ride running wide open. And at that moment, I was thinking about nothing but decapitation. The line's 30 inches off the ground. Somebody hits it fast enough, hits them in their neck, kills them. And so I take my cousin back down there and I'm like, man, and this is where it kind of gets a little fuzzy in my memory, but I remember looking at him and saying, and I wasn't even that close to the line, me looking at him and saying, I wish that line was this high. And when I did that, I either touched or I was close enough that the power jumped. Why it didn't do it the first time, I have no idea. But I took 7,200 volts of electricity. And I try to tell people 7,200 volts of electricity was enough that it shut my whole neighborhood down. Actually, I know you're grounded different, but the electric chair is only 6,800. I took more than the electric chair. I remember the vibration of the power going through my body, but everything was dark. It was enough power that it stopped my heart for 30 seconds. And the reason I know this now is because when you get electrocuted, the power doesn't shut off for 30 seconds, and then it'll kick the breaker. So they know that my heart had stopped the entire time I was electrocuted, which was for 30 seconds. And then it shot me off the back. And when I hit the ground hard enough that it started my heart back up, which is when I woke up. Immediately, I felt like I was on fire. I felt like I wanted to climb down in a ditch to cool off, because when you get electrocuted, it actually burns you from the inside out. I remember my cousin trying to get me out of the ditch. I remember the ambulance coming. I remember the fire department coming, the police coming. I remember getting loaded up into the ambulance. I remember my wife being there with me. And I remember me trying to keep her calm. And me saying, and I'll never forget me saying, everything's going to be okay. And I remember looking down at my left thumb, and my left thumb was just barely hanging on. I knew I was going to lose my left thumb. And I remember telling my wife, I'm going to lose my left thumb. It was basically gone anyway. And I said, and I told you a minute ago, my grandfather passed away 3 months before. And I told my wife right then, I said, Papa lost his entire arm, and I'm just going to lose my thumb. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. And I know when I say that, everybody's like, oh, you were pretty calm. I said, no, I was hurting, but I just was being, I don't know if I was trying to calm myself down, calm her down, but I just remember thinking over and over, I watched my grandfather farm. I watched him do tobacco. I watched him pick up hay bales. I watched him use tools without an arm. He had a prosthetic, but I'm not going to whine and cry about a thumb.
Yeah.
I remember getting to Owensboro Hospital and getting admitted into Owensboro. And I don't know if there's any questions before I get from Owensboro.
I want to kind of take a pause for just a second for the healthcare providers, for the people that are not healthcare, and then the healthcare providers. So, you are a patient, and the only thing you can see is what you physically see is your thumb. But what you're not realizing at the time, that the injury is actually occurring inside of your body, which obviously, as you can see from, your arms. So at what point did you realize this is much bigger than a thumb injury?
So several days.
Really? Okay.
And I guess that's probably getting from Owensboro to Nashville is probably the next part of the story, because I didn't know. I was confused.
Okay.
I go into the emergency room in Owensboro Hospital, and I had doctors and surgeons rushing in and out.
Okay.
And the way they were coming in and out in a hurry, I knew that something was not right. It was more than just my thumb. Just from everybody being in such a panic, right? I remember the doctor, ER doctor, coming in, and I remember him saying, "We have to get this kid out of here." And I remember him telling my wife, "We have to get your husband to a burn unit. We have called Vanderbilt Hospital burn unit, and we've called Louisville, Kentucky. And whoever calls us back first is where your husband's going. We have a helicopter on its way to pick him up, and we will life flight him at one of the two places." And I remember hearing that, and I also remember telling them and thinking that, hey, I would rather go to Nashville because my dad's doctors was in Nashville. I know people in Nashville. I don't know that many people in Louisville. And I remember saying, let's just go to Nashville. And them saying, son, you don't understand. It's whoever calls us back first is where you're going. Luckily, Vanderbilt called back first and accepted me to come to Vanderbilt Hospital. And I was immediately put into the helicopter and on my way to Nashville. And it's interesting because where my accident was is just south of the hospital.
Okay.
Nashville is south of my house. So I remember getting in a helicopter and flying over top of where I got hurt. And I remember my left shoulder looking out the window and seeing everybody still at the scene where I got hurt at on my way to Nashville. But I remember also asking the nurses on the helicopters, like, why are we going to Nashville? Like, I don't understand. It's just my thumb. I don't understand why I can't be in Owensboro. And every response that I got was, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. That's it. That's all I knew. Obviously, in the helicopter, they prepped me and got me ready for surgery. They put a pick in my jugular vein to put the medicine in. They cathed me in the helicopter. And that was one of them things that I remember seeing is when they cathed me, I remember seeing the bag, the urine bag, and my urine collecting in there looked like Dr. Pepper. It was that dark. I didn't know what that was. I know what that is now, but I didn't know what that was at the time. I remember getting to Nashville, getting unloaded, and going into a room that reminded me of a morgue. Everything was stainless steel. Had no clue where I was. And that room that I went into was hydro. And hydro is where they take a pressure washer and they wash your dead skin off of you. Now, I guess stepping back just for a minute, whenever I looked at my hands looked like a stroke victim. They were curled up. I couldn't straighten them. I didn't know what that was, but basically every tendon in my finger was popped like rubber bands, and they found my tendons wrapped around my wrist on both hands. So my fingers would have never worked. Anyway, I have recently found out so much stuff. When you get electrocuted, it burns you from the inside out. It causes poisonous toxins and blood in your body. That has to go somewhere. It goes through your kidneys, which is why my urine was so dark. So my kidneys were shutting down. I found out that all 10 tendons were popped like rubber bands. I found out that when you get electrocuted and it burns you from the inside out, you get burns. My whole right arm was 3rd-degree burns, so I had skin graft on my whole entire right arm. I remember seeing it, and I remember seeing that it was kind of swollen and almost looked like there a really bad sunburn with even liquid underneath the skin, like just a really bad burn, and it was white, like dead skin. I didn't know what it was at the time. So I found a bunch of that kind of stuff out after I woke up. But as soon as I got to Vanderbilt, they waited on my wife to sign release forms to amputate whatever they had to amputate, do a blood transfusion, and take me to surgery. So I was immediately, once they signed papers, I was put into an induced coma. I was in an induced coma for 3 days. They amputated both arms immediately that night, but I had no idea. So in my mind, I'm just thinking that it's my thumb and that's it.
Okay.
3 days later.
Man, Jason, this is a lot to unpack. I wanted to go back from a healthcare provider standpoint. I have, and many of the people that are on and listening have picked up people that have been burned. And in my opinion, truly, this is just an opinion, there are some categories of bad things. I have always had a difficult time communicating with severely burned patients because on numerous occasions, and I apologize for people listening to this of the graphic, this being in nature, is communicating with burned patients that have no idea they're burned severe as they are and asking if they're going to be okay. And the answer coming out as in we're going to do everything we can to help you, but in the back of our mind, knowing that the patient is not going to survive.
Yep.
That is very difficult. And I put myself in the positions of the providers that are trying to inject hope into you, you not realizing it. And maybe that was a good thing, maybe not. But my question for you is there anything through the providers up into the point when you went into surgery that you wish someone would have told you, or something that they said that they wish they wouldn't have told you? Does anything come to mind?
No, I mean, I still keep in touch with all my burn nurses and Dr. Jeffrey Guy was my doctor, and I still talk to him all the time. We text and talk, and no, I think that they definitely kept me very calm.
Okay.
I don't think some people may think, why didn't they just tell me the truth of that moment that I was going to lose my arms? Maybe they didn't know, you know what I mean? Maybe there was an opportunity to save my arms. And matter of fact, they thought about looking at my legs because the electric came out of my right foot. It blew my tennis shoe. They found my tennis shoe 30 feet from where I was.
Okay.
So what if they would have told me, hey, you're not going to lose your arms, but you're going to lose your leg, and I wake up 3 days later with a leg and no arms? You know what I mean? Like, until you know, I guess, what is actually going to happen, I think the best thing that they did was they kept me calm and they explained enough to me to know it was serious, but enough to keep me calm and feel like that everything was going to be okay. You know what I mean? And maybe that's a personal thought. I mean, everybody thinks different, and everybody has that opportunity to think different. I have people all the time that has lost limbs and say, I'm never going to be as good as you. And all it is making your mind up. It's not, I'm Superman. I'm not Superman. You know what I mean? It's just, I made my mind up and I wanted to be successful, and anybody can do that in any profession or any situation. I really didn't do anything that was special except for wanting to live.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to talk about that. I really appreciate you sharing that experience about the healthcare providers, just because of that's a difficult position for us to be in, and providing hope and staying calm are key points that I certainly took away from that.
Yep.
So you go to surgery, you wake up. When do you realize you have no, lower arms, and what's going through your mind?
So they put me in an induced coma for 3 days, and I went through multiple amputations for the first 3 days. I mean, sometimes multiple times a day, because they were trying to get the infection to clear my kidneys up. That's why I did it. And I have a lot of different perspectives on a lot of different stuff now that I know what I know now, and I really try to put myself in front of as many people as I can. But, Dr. Guy tried to keep my limbs as long as he possibly could. Now that I know what I know, especially as a bilateral arm amputee, if he would have amputated me at the wrist, some of the technology that I have now, I would not be able to have because of length. I am very grateful that he amputated where he amputated. I mean, I guess I got lucky to amputate at the level that I'm amputated at, so that I can have multiple technology options and opportunities, because some people won't because of being too long or whatever. But I wake up from an induced coma 3 days after my accident. I was strapped to a bed because I actually had a fracture in my neck and my back as well. Obviously, you're drowsy. And I remember seeing my nurse, and I remember asking for my parents. I remember saying, where's my dad? And this goes back to watching my dad and my mom and understanding that if my mom and dad says something's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. That's always been my piece of knowing that if they say it's going to be all right, it's going to be all right. You know what I mean? And sometimes people need that. So I remember asking for my parents, and I remember my dad coming in the room and sitting down with me. Had no clue I didn't have arms. I could still feel them, And my dad sitting down next to me and him saying, exactly how he said it was, Jason, I don't know how we're going to get through this, but we will. We've always had faith. It's going to be hard work. It's going to be ups and downs. But in order to save your life, they had to amputate both your arms.
So your dad's telling you this, Jason, like you don't know when your dad's telling you, I'm going to pause for a second. I can't even imagine a father. You're a father. I'm a father. On telling your child that they don't have any arms. Your dad, an incredible man. But go ahead. I just wanted to pause because the gravity in what you just said is difficult for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah. And it was super hard, I'm sure, because now that I have kids, obviously it's like, and my dad didn't want to have to do that. Obviously, I mean, I remember him I think he wanted to come in the room by himself, but then he was also I cannot go in this room and tell him this by myself.
Mm.
Like, I need you to come with me, my mom. And at the time, I think, my dad is worried about, well, this is kind of even more if you think about it. So right before I got hurt, we built the largest gypsum plant in North America, drywall board, in Wheeling, West Virginia. It was a several $1 million project, and we had it done, and we did it for BP. They did not want to pay us. So my dad was going through a lawsuit and was about to lose everything he had. House, equipment, everything paid for the bank had at the time of my accident. So not only was my dad going through, how am I going to tell my son he lost his hands, but he also is about to lose everything he's ever worked hard for, ever. And at that moment, he told me, he said, I didn't care about my business. I didn't care about losing my house. I didn't care about nothing. I figured it would work itself out, and it did. But he was solely focused on me, and that's it. So he comes in, he tells me that, and people ask me all the time, like, what went through my mind, and to be honest with you, I don't know what went through my mind right there at that moment. I think there was, several things. I'm sure there was, what's life going to look like? I still got 2 daughters at home. I still have a wife. Like, trying to take it all in, and the unknowns was probably more than, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I was upset. I'm sure I just had a lot of things going for me having kids too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I realized before I got hurt, when you have kids, you have somebody that depends on you, and that is your job as a dad. That life is not about you anymore.
Yeah,
it's about the people, or in my case, these 2 little girls that you decided you want to have these kids, and you got them, and that's your responsibility now. So anyway, I pretty much went right back to sleep. I'm sure I was on whatever kind of medicine, and I remember waking up the second time. I remember already being in my room in the burn unit, and I don't know if this was the day that I woke up, a day later or whatever, but I remember Dr. Guy coming in my room, meeting him for the first time, and him sitting down next to me and basically telling me that, Jason, life's going to be hard. You're going to be in this hospital for months, and I want to do whatever I can do to help you be successful. And I want you to think about one goal that you have in your life, and I want to try to help you reach that goal, but I want you to make sure that it's realistic. And he said, before you get out of this hospital, I want to help you with that. And I remember him standing up and about to walk out the door, and me, telling him, like, hey, Dr. Guy, I know what I want. And him turning around and sitting down with me, and here I am, 29 years old, and him sitting down with me is like, how do you know what you want this quick? Like, and I'm sure he might have somebody that is thinking, I want to be able to drive again. I want to be able to throw a baseball again, or whatever it is. And he sits down with me and he says, what do you want to be able to do? And I told him, I said, I have 2 daughters, and I said, I have to be able to hold my kids. That's it. That's all I care about. And I remember him, and obviously, I mean, it was really hard. He cried, I cried, whatever. And I remember him saying, I will make sure that happens, And then the next day he comes in my room and he sits down with me and he says, hey, Jason, your kids are here to see you. And this might be 4 or 5 days after losing my arms. And him saying, I'm going to bring the kids into your room. And I said, no, you're not. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I do not want my kids to see me hooked up to all these machines, no arms, heart monitors, tubes hanging out of my arms, feeding tube. I mean, I was hooked up to all kinds of stuff. And I said, I want to go to the waiting room. And Dr. Guy's saying, dude, there's no way I can get you to the waiting room unless I unhooked you from all this stuff. And me telling him, unhook me. Like, I want to go to the waiting room. I want to hold my kids out there. I want it to be as close to normal as it can be. And me talking him into that, and him unhooking feeding tubes and all that stuff, and me remembering what that feels like to unhook a feeding tube and pulling it out of your stomach. And I went to the waiting room that day, and I held my kids for the first time 5 or 6 days after losing 2 arms. And I had that peace that went through my mind, through my body, that was, everything's going to be okay. I don't know how, but it's all going to work out. And I just remember having that peace of knowing that God would provide one way or another. And not knowing how, but just trusting that he would make it work. You know what I mean? And it's hard to do.
So, Jason, I need to ask you this. I don't know if you've ever been asked this question. I've never asked it. But you mentioned a sense of peace. And I experienced that when I was going through my post-traumatic stress storm. Truly, there was a point in time, live or die, and I was really washed over with peace, and it was true faith. But can you describe a little bit more details to the people that have never felt that? But you were in a position, maybe you're questioning, whether you're going to live or die. You're focusing on your daughters. But for those that are curious, and I am too, with your feelings on this, when you say a sense of peace, can you unpack that a little bit more? Because, and anyway, just tell us in your words what that was.
Yeah, I mean, I think that piece was that I had both my parents growing up, mom and dad in the same house, married, you know what I mean? And I know how important it was to me to have a dad and a mom in my life. And I know some people don't have that, unfortunately, but I knew what that was like. And I knew that my girls deserved to have a dad. Mm-hmm. And have a dad, whatever that looked like. For me, being a dad was, walking them down an aisle one day, or playing softball with them, or even just holding their hands across the street, or whatever that was. And I knew, like, the peace that I got, I knew I could have died that day pretty easy. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I didn't. So I knew that my life was spared for a reason. And even if that reason was just to be a dad and not be able to ever do anything for myself again, I knew that there was a reason, and I had that peace that went through my body and my mind that, life's not about me anymore. It's about my kids. And I don't get to talk about my son as often, and I will later. I have 3 kids now, but at the time I just had the 2. And did I know that my wife would stay with me? No, not really. I mean, I knew that when I married my wife, that she was a very big Christian, doesn't believe in divorce, doesn't believe, when she said I do, she meant that, all those words you say when you get married. But I really didn't know, Jenny was 27 when I got hurt. And literally the easiest thing for her to have done is wash her hands and say, I don't want this lifestyle, and leave. I mean, that would have been the easiest thing. And she didn't, and she still hadn't. Now it's too late. She can't now, but she, even at that moment, I didn't know what that looked like probably as much, but I knew that I had these 2 little girls that I had to raise, and I had to still be a dad. And I just think that was the piece that I felt was my life was spared. So yeah. What what do we do now? Like
Okay.
what's the step?
Well, your determination, and I can't wait to share this other part and to really to unpack that. So you were told that you're going to be in the hospital for months, which is not uncommon for patients that have been burned, 2, 3, 4 months, then extensive rehab. Your story becomes, I mean, it's amazing to this point, but you get out of the hospital in, was it 12 days?
Yep.
So your determination. So I would love for you to sort of unpack your grit, your hard work, your determination about I'm not staying. I'm ready to get out. And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I remember telling Dr. Guy that months was not an option, and I just held my kids for the first time, so I knew that I reached my first goal already. And then I remember me just telling him, like, Dr. Guy, what do I have to do to get out of the hospital? And him, and I don't want people to think that he didn't believe I could get out either. I think that he was kind of, well, if anybody can do it, he might be able to do it, but probably not. You know what I mean? And I just remember saying, you got to tell me what I got to do. And then every single day I worked towards those goals that I had to do to get out. 12 days from losing my hand, Dr. Guy, not 12 days after I woke up, but like literally from March 1st. So this was March 12th or 13th or whatever date it was. 12 days after losing my hands, Dr. Guy walks in the room. And I remember him sitting down next to me and him saying, Jason, I never imagined I would ever tell you this, but if your wife and your mother are willing to become a nurse at home, I'm going to let you go home. And, I had skin graft from both legs to cover my right arm, still wrapped up. And so long and short, I did everything that I had to do in 12 days, and I was released from the hospital and came back to Owensboro, Kentucky. And I think everybody was shocked. I think I was probably shocked too, you know what I mean? But I worked really, really hard to get to that point. And talking about healthcare too, unfortunately, I've been around a lot of hospitals that you're treated like a number more than a person. And I was never treated like that at Vanderbilt. My dad's doctor is at Centennial Hospital, my dad's family doctor. Everybody I've ever met at Centennial Hospital has been the same. They give you time to walk in and say, how's life going, right? It's not always just, this is what's wrong with you, this is what we got to do, I'll see you later, I got to go to another patient. I remember Dr. Guy coming in my room and watching a NASCAR race with me on a Sunday. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
And I know they can't do that all the time. I understand that, but it's the little things of just asking, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Or you look good, you're doing this. For 30 minutes, you're talking about life. And then for 5 minutes, it's okay. I had to amputate. I had to do this. I had to do that. The medical stuff.
Yeah.
You got 30 minutes of a relationship and then 5 minutes of textbook stuff. And that means a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going on 16 years and the nurses follow me on Facebook. I still every time I go to Nashville, I go by and give me a hug from them. I got their cell phone numbers. We have and I tell people all the time, like all those doctors and nurses that I had at that moment, they have a very big special place in my heart. You know what I mean? And
Of course.
and I think it goes both ways. They were inspired by me, but I was inspired by them.
Yeah.
I remember when Dr. Guy told me that I could be sent home, he said, I want to be the one to roll you down to the car in a wheelchair. Like, okay. So he comes in my room and Vanderbilt burn units in L shape, and I was in the very, very back. And I remember him rolling me, and when I went around the corner, every doctor, nurse, and resident that had ever been back there working on me, I mean, there were 20, 30 people were on both sides of the hallway, clapping, crying, hugging me. That was that moment that I didn't even realize that I was inspiring them and showing them what I could do, because I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for myself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I wasn't trying to get attention, and I wasn't trying to inspire them. I just wanted to live my life the way I wanted to live my life, and it inspired them by doing that. And when I went down that hallway and I seen that, man, that was very touching. You know what I mean? I mean, I cried. Dr. Guy cried. I mean, it was amazing.
Man, Jason, that is incredible. I want to, man, your story, there's so much depth to that. And I want to ask you, when you get out, okay, and changing gears, I want to go back to another funny story. So you get out, and is your buddy's name Sam?
Yep.
Okay. So, you're adapting back to life. You are a huge outdoors person. You love it. And so you want to go back to life as normal. And you and Sam go on an adventure, turkey hunting. Share that with us. It's a great story.
So it was just a month after my accident. I had became really good friends with Dr. Guy, had his cell phone number. And I remember didn't have prosthetics at the time, and I was starting to learn how to, I went through Hobby Lobby stories, so I figured out real quick how to put my own clothes on. I was starting to really try to figure out how to live life and do some of the things that I needed to do. And Sam called me, he's like, let's go turkey hunting. And I was like, dude, I can't go turkey hunting. It's like, how am I going to do that? And he said, I think I got it figured out. And I was like, well, let me call Dr. Guy. So I remember texting Dr. Guy and saying, hey, my buddy's wanting to go turkey hunting, and I want to know if I can go. And it was a long pause. And he texted back and he said, I don't know. And I said, and then he wrote back, he said, why do you think you cannot do it? And I said, well, I'm really just worried about a tick getting inside my wound and you having to amputate more off. And he got to laughing and he said, just make sure you spray off really good. And I was like, cool, so I'm good to go. So I called Sam, and this is just the kind of people that's, has been in my life. But I call Sam and I tell him, I was like, hey, Dr. Guy says I can go. I'm going to come up and spend the night with you. But I said, I want you to know I still can't use the bathroom on my own, right? Like, it's very embarrassing to have somebody have to help you, and especially a friend or another guy or whatever. And he wrote me back, texted me back, and he's like, man, I'll do whatever I got to do to help you. Like, you're like a brother to me. He's like, come on. So I went to Morgantown, stayed the night with Sam, and in my mind, I was thinking that I'm just going to sit next to him and watch him kill a turkey. And I'm fine with it. So he comes and we're sitting in his living room floor, and he lays this shotgun in my lap, and he says, you're hunting tomorrow. And I was like, how's that going to happen? And he said, I think I got it figured out. So he took the 2 screws out of the butt of the shotgun, put a ratchet strap on it, strapped it to my shoulder. He had a tripod on the front with a radiator hose clamp and a string from the trigger to my mouth. And I was like, this is dangerous. And so he gets to laughing. He's like, I think we can do it. So as I was sitting in his living room floor, I was dry firing it, just to see if I could pull the trigger. And I could. So the next day, and I don't tell everybody this story, but the next day, I bet I shot at 6 or 7 turkeys and had no success. But I finally got an opportunity to shoot at a turkey, and I harvested it. And that was one of them things that I would have never imagined that was going to happen, but it did. And it was just one of them things. And there's so many stories I could talk for hours about not really knowing if that was going to happen, and it happened. And it was like, man, I did that. What's next? You know what I mean? And I think that's how I've always lived my life is throw an opportunity at me, throw a challenge at me. Once I figure it out and I succeed on that, I like what's next. You know what I mean? Like, let's do it. Let's keep going. And 16 years ago when I got hurt, still today, I'm still that person. I'm still that person that says, what's next? Let's do it, you know? And kind of to go back, it's funny because I told you that I thought my grandfather was the first person to ever lose an arm. I felt like I was the second. I remember telling my wife that I wanted to be the best upper limb prosthetic user in the world. That was my goal. And I thought it was going to be really easy because I thought I was the only one in the world like this. So,
Yeah.
like, can't be that hard. And it's funny because I am very humbled of who I am, the person I am. I've got to meet a lot of really cool people. I've got to meet famous people, not famous people, rich people, poor people, like all walks of life, different countries, different cities, the way people are born and raised. And I mean, I've seen it all.
Yeah.
And right now, people tell me that I am the best prosthetic user in the world. And that it's funny because I don't feel like I am, because I feel like if you ever think that you're the best, then you quit trying.
Okay.
I'm not going to quit trying. It's going, it's like Kobe Bryant, he got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and had a 2-hour practice before everybody else, came to practice. And he said, I don't remember exact words he said, but he basically said, nobody's going to outwork him. And I can tell you, there ain't nobody going to outwork me. Not going to happen.
So Jason, I'm going to talk. Thank you. That is such a powerful leadership statement that you made. So I want to ask you this question is, let's talk about habits for a second, because you could have chosen to have the attitude of being the victim, but you didn't. Like, you're a victor. You're conquering this thing. And I know it's a struggle. And walk us through some habits that you have on leading yourself, because we talk about this on the podcast. Leading yourself is the most important thing that you'll ever do. You're doing that. We want to learn from you. Tell us about your daily habits that you have that keep you sharp, that keep you growing to deal with the next challenge.
I still feel like, and I know this is a simple, easy question probably, or an easy answer. I still feel like it's my kids. I mean, in the mornings when I wake up, when I woke up laying in the bed with no arms, back in 2008, and hear them little feet running down the hallway, or hearing a laugh or whatever, that I realized that those kids still need me. And even though that's such a simple answer, that's the way I've always lived my life, as my kids still need me. And I want to show my kids and prove to my kids that anything's possible, even in the midst of such a tragedy, that there can always be a positive out of it somehow. And I've also been the kind of person that I don't want people to think I've never been upset about losing my arms. I've never asked the question of why. I've never wished that it didn't happen. I'm not the kind of person that lives in the past. It happened, so we got to move forward, right? But those days that I had a bad day, or I was upset, or I tried to do something and I couldn't do it, and it took me longer, and I still remember how to do it with real hands, and it's so much easier and faster. But when I got upset, I didn't take it out on my family. I went outside and I kicked rocks. If I had to cuss for a minute, I went outside and I cussed for a minute, kicked rocks. But then whenever I came back in the door, I was a different, I was the dad, the person that I wanted to be.
Man, there's a lot to what you just said, Jason, that I want to pause and just kind of share a couple of insights. So, you mentioned, and I was going to ask you this question: how do you handle a bad day? And when you said that you understand that you can't take it out on those that you love, that is a powerful statement. And you find a release mechanism and you go outside and you do whatever it is. You kick rocks, drive around on your property, whatever it is. That is an important element because I think it is so easy for us to take out our frustrations on those closest to us. And that is not a healthy habit. And for you to share that, that is powerful. And yeah, it is because, every day we're faced with challenges and we're faced with struggles. And I appreciate you certainly unpacking that at all. So this journey, and you also mentioned another thing. You talked about you would not change it and you never asked God why. And I asked you the question, and you can unpack it a little bit if you want to, is if you had a chance to go back to the day and you could choose not to get hurt or to get hurt, knowing what you know now, what would you choose?
I wouldn't have changed what happened, and I feel like sometimes when I tell people that, they think, and I'm sure we're going to get into this later, but some of the opportunities I've had has been really, really cool. I've been on TV shows and in the public eye. Some people around here say I'm a celebrity, but I don't feel like I'm a celebrity. But I think sometimes people think, oh, well, you're just saying that because you had an opportunity of being on Hawaii 5 or whatever. You know what I mean? And that's not it at all. I've learned a lot about life. I've learned a lot about myself. Um, I feel like when I worked as in the construction field, I enjoyed working with my dad and doing stuff with my dad. But I woke up in the mornings, I went to work, and then I just went home because that's what I was supposed to do, is make a living for my family. And whatever I had to do to make a living for my family. But now I feel like I have a purpose. Every day I wake up, I feel like there's a purpose for my life. I feel like there's a reason that I do what I do. And I would not change that for anything because I love doing what I do. I love helping people. I love sharing my story. I love encouraging people. I told somebody one day, if I could be the next Taylor Swift and everybody know who Jason Koger is, I would absolutely love that, because the reason they would know who I am is for the positivity and them learning that life sometimes doesn't go as planned, but that you can overcome it. Just like I told you in my neighborhood, when you see somebody in a bind and you see an old person trying to mow their grass and you can tell that's really hard on them, why wouldn't you stop and try to help a stranger out? And I think that's where our world is now, is it's all about me and what I can do for myself and how I can benefit myself. And it shouldn't be like that. I think that that's why our country is in the shape that it's in now, because nobody wants to do nothing for somebody else. They just don't want to anymore. And I'm totally different, because if I can pull over and help somebody and not get a dime out of it, it helps me more than what they think and about any amount of money I can get. And now I get that opportunity to reach out to new amputees and meet people that's lost limbs, and be that encouragement. I just talked to a guy the other day, a 14-year-old kid that lost limbs, and his dad called me yesterday and said, hey, I want you to take my son underneath your wings. And I don't even know this kid, right? Don't know the parents, nothing. That's a huge honor for me to get asked to do that. And and he basically was like, what would I owe you to be that person to my son? And I'm like, man, there's no amount of money that you can pay me that makes me feel any better than just doing it for the reasons I want to do it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I wish there was a lot more people out there like that, because people just, it's all about that dollar they can make and the popularity or the Facebook likes they can get. And you can't take none of that with you when you die.
That's so inspiring for you to be able to share. And that really is the motto of healthcare providers, right? We're wanting to serve, and we're putting others before ourselves. And there's so many lessons in that. And for you to do that, I know you've added value to so many people, and you're making the world a better place, and you're inspiring all of us, which is absolutely amazing. Do you mind, for those that are joining on video, to kind of show, what it is, where your prosthetics are, and how you use them, and just to kind of like a show and tell? You're drinking from, a Coke bottle right now, and it's pretty amazing. So would love for you to take the opportunity to kind of show off, how you use your hands. And by the way, you had said you have bionic hands. Is it true that you are the first recipient of two bionic hands in the world?
I was. I have been 5 times now. I was in 2008. That's when myoelectric multi-articulating hands came out, was in 2008. And I was the first bilateral to ever have them. And then we're on the 5th generation hand now. So I've been the first person in the world 5 times. I get to work with the engineers and some of the top people in the company, and I think they value my opinion. I mean, they call me from Iceland and Scotland a lot, and I get to tell them what I think, and I think they value my opinion in a big way, which is awesome. So I got body powered stuff too, which these have been around since Civil War days, and basically they're rubber bands, keep it closed, and then you basically are just pulling a cable. So I got a strap goes around my back, so when I move my right shoulder, it's pulling my left hook, and then this one opens this one. Rubber bands keep it closed, and it's pretty funny. So I don't know if you can tell that I got green rubber bands. The more rubber bands you have, the tighter it closes. They make a amputee rubber band that is really thick, and they are not super expensive, but they're expensive. But these green bands are sheep castration bands, and they last a lot longer. And you can buy like 200 of them for like $3 on Amazon. So I've learned a lot.
This is awesome.
It has a button, so in my opinion, has the best wrist that you can possibly get. It's a 4-function wrist made by Texas Assistive. So basically, when I hold this button down, I can rotate my hook, and lock it in place wherever I want it. It also has a button here that whenever I push against something, it'll flex, gets to your body a little closer, and you can rotate it. So that's really neat. And then I have and I just told you a minute ago, I actually you break stuff all the time when you're active. And I have the multi-articulating hand, and I actually broke the finger yesterday. So the finger don't work, the thumb. So and I just seen UPS walk across the front door. So my thumb came in today, so I'll replace it in a little bit. But basically, this is my book, but I'll zoom in where you can see my bionic hands. So it's a multi-articulating hand, and basically there's my name right there, Jason Koger. If you Google my name, you will find all kinds of videos and stuff on how I use my myoelectrics. So somebody can Google that. I'm on all social media stuff. People can follow me on social media. And really, I like when people follow me because they ask me questions. I want people to ask me questions. And I want to see that whenever I get in front of people, whether it's a podcast or a speech, and the day that it airs, and I get a lot of likes or a lot of follows, I know that I'm doing my job. You know what I mean? Like, I know and you never know who may need me later in life. I've met a lot of people that 10 years after I met them, they had a loved one lose a limb. You know what I mean? It just kind of blows my mind that, or they know somebody lost a limb and they help get them in touch with me. So it's always really good to share my story, not to be famous and not to get so many Facebook friends or likes or whatever it is. But the more I share my story, the more people share my story, somebody out there is going to see my story that needs me. And I think that's pretty powerful. So anyway, I do have a public page on Facebook. I don't usually add a lot of people on my personal page because it doesn't hold very many. So I do a lot of the public stuff, and then Instagram, obviously, and all that stuff. But the way my myoelectrics work is I have a sensor that lays on my muscle in 2 spots. So when I feel like I raise my wrist in there, it opens. And when I feel like I lower my wrist, it closes. And then I have wrist rotators too. So when I contract, I can tell the hand to rotate. I mean, it'll keep on going either way. So I can rotate it down or up, which, just like this hand, I can grab the bottle like this, and then I can't get it to my mouth because it's in this position. But if you rotate it down, I can do my myoelectric same, so it makes it easier to hold stuff in different positions. I charge them every night. I have nothing that's adaptive. I didn't want anything adaptive, so what I wear, I can do everything with what I wear. There's really nothing that I cannot do, except for I cannot cook, clean, or change dirty diapers.
And pull up your pants now, right?
I can do that now. Depends on my mood or not, I guess.
Oh my gosh. Oh, well, Jason, where can we find your book?
So my book, it's on Amazon, or you can go to my website, which is just jasonkoger.com, and the book is on my website as well. But it's called "Handed a Greater Purpose" by Jason Koger. And I thought of that is exactly kind of what we've been talking about without even saying it, is that I truly feel like I've been handed a greater purpose in my life than I did before 2008. And that's why I named the book "Handed a Greater Purpose." And so anyway, but yep, jasonkoger.com, Amazon. One thing I've never asked anybody to do that I need to start telling people is if they get the book, they like the book, I would love for them to go on Amazon, even if they get it off my website, or if they get it from me personally. I would love for people to go to Amazon and give me a review. I've never asked anybody to do it. I might not have any reviews on there. I don't know because I've never asked, but I would love to get reviews.
Well, I'm going to add to that is that I understand how the reviews are with, the book that I wrote. So it's a big deal. And so everyone that's listening to this, please order the book, go and review it. It is a big deal for an author because we need that sense of like what we did. It's a lot of work to write a book. You know that. It's painful. It's grueling. And that certainly does make a difference. So everybody, please rate that. And we will help you in any way. It's amazing of what you've been able to share with us. And I wish I could just spend the whole day asking you more questions, but there's just one more that I want to ask you is, with, where you are right now, you have grown immensely. You are making a difference. And what's next for you?
People ask me that all the time, and I've actually just had the opportunity. I tell people I do a lot of public speaking now, and that's the only class I failed in college was public speaking. I just got asked to be a part of Team Never Quit, which is Marcus Luttrell has his own podcast. I've been on his podcast. He personally, him and his wife pick who they want to be involved with their speaking bureau. And I was one of them. And people that don't know Marcus Luttrell, he was the one that they did the movie Lone Survivor with Mark Wahlberg. Mark Wahlberg actually played the part of Marcus Luttrell based on a true story. So I'm hoping that that's going to share my story more and get in front of more people. And, I don't know. I mean, I always leave the door wide open. And then whenever I get an opportunity, I see what that opportunity is. And I try to always go for it. I've done a lot more speeches this year than I've done last year and more than I did the year before that. So I feel like my story is always growing. One thing I didn't talk about in my book is I did not write a book for profit. Obviously, I want to get my money back out of it. I feel like that's only fair. But once it is profitable, and I'm really close to being profitable in my book, I put that money into its own little spot. And from time to time, if I meet somebody that has gone through an amputation and they want to spend a weekend with me, then I use that money to fly them to me or to fly me to them and spend a weekend with them or a week or whatever they need. I've been involved in a lot of different foundations. It's not always just about amputee stuff, but long and short, I use that money on my book to help others or to do really cool things. I don't ever tell anybody that it goes to a specific foundation. It's just when something touches my heart, I have a way to be able to do what I want to do with that. So that's why I wrote my book. I also wrote my book to give people an inspiration and understand that they can get through what they've been through, but it definitely takes faith. I mean, I tell people that all the time. I'm not a preacher. I don't care what religion you are. It doesn't matter. I feel like that we all have one God and we're all going to go the same place. Hopefully we all go the same place. And I think you just got to be right with your heart. And hopefully we see each other upstairs. You know what I mean? That's ultimately the goal. And I tell people that as well. It's like, people ask me if I ever had a fear of dying, and I don't. I feel like I know where I'm going. I feel like I've done what I'm supposed to do personally. I do go to church, but even the way I feel is I feel like I do what God wants me to do, and ultimately I feel like I'm definitely going to heaven. So when that time comes, it's the time to go. And I don't know. That's just who I am, I guess.
Well, Jason, we appreciate your time. Really, you've added so much value to us, and best of luck in your journey. You certainly have made this an amazing, memorable experience for all of the listeners and me. So once again, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and sharing my story.
I am so grateful that you were able to join us today. Please share this episode with others and give it a 5-star review. Until next time, remember, be intentional about your leadership journey, and remember that you are the most important person that you will ever lead.